This past Monday, my coworkers and I returned to our hotel after a day of work in the field. Rebecca and I walked to our rooms, and as we stood outside of them, I opened up mine and saw someone inside my bathroom. I said, "Hello?" Nobody answered. My first instinct was that it was probably just a cleaning lady in there for some reason. And then I saw my bag with my clothes in her hands. So I said to my coworker, "There's a woman in my room." Then I asked the woman, "Hey, what are you doing with my stuff?" The story gets a little fuzzy here because I can't remember everything that I said in the moment that I said it. She just kept mumbling about how her key still worked, how it still worked, and that's how she got in. I was in shock. She was obviously very flustered, having been caught mid-robbery. She dropped my bags and fumbled around with her purse in a white plastic bag. By this time, my coworker was behind me, watching all of the insanity unfold. The woman was scrambling and walking toward the door, and I said, "What's in the bag?" Thinking it was probably my stuff, and she said, No, it's just my things. It's just my things. I'll show you." And so she did. I looked and I actually didn't see anything of mine. So since I'm obviously still in shock, I just let her leave. I went to my room and it's been ransacked. I did a quick glance over just to see if anything had been taken. All of my electronics were still there. Then I went to the bathroom and saw my underwear, my bikini, and my clothes shoved into my own bags randomly. Even my passport was shoved in there too. I then looked over on the counter and saw that she'd gotten into my medication. In the moment, I'm not really sure what was going through my head, other than I just wanted it back. So I quickly ran out the door to go find her. I ran to the laundry room downstairs and out to the sides of the hotel. Didn't see her anywhere. Quickly realized I was never going to find her. So my coworker and I went down to the lobby to tell them what had happened, and we called the police. We went back up to my room to wait, and I noticed that there's this metal bat laying on my bed, a little larger than those novelty wooden bats that you can get at a baseball game. And there's also a flashlight on the end of it. She must have left it behind in her hurry. She also left behind a necklace that must have fallen out of her bag when she was scrambling with mine. I was mostly freaking out at this point because I'd thought she'd gotten away with my medication that I really needed. The police ended up getting there and took our statements, looked around the room as well. One thing that I did notice is there were bits of drywall in the sink, and I pointed that out to the police, but none of us really knew where it was coming from. We started looking at the door and the windows to see if she'd pried her way in somehow. There was nothing. So we kind of just went with the idea that she had a spare key or something, even though the hotel front desk was adamant that there's no way that that could be. The officer that came had brought 2 more officers as backup because they thought the woman might still be in the vicinity. But after our statements were taken, there was nothing else they could really do, so they just left. I sat down to finally make some calls to tell people. So I'm on the phone, looking at the drywall and the mirror on the wall right above it. Then it hit me. I got my coworker and asked her to help me pull this mirror off the wall. We took the mirror down, and there's a hole just big enough for a desperate junkie to squeeze through. I asked Brian and Rebecca if I should call the cops again to let them know that I found this, and my boss said, "There's still 2 cops in the parking lot." So I went down to tell them. The female cop kind of rolled her eyes, but the young guy said, "I'll come check it out." They both came back up, looked inside the hole and found a pillow, blankets, cigarettes, clothes, and toothbrushes. This woman had been living in the wall behind the mirror for God knows how long. She had access to me in my room at all times. One of the officers called the original officer to come back and take pictures of this. She explained to him what was going on, and all I hear over the radio is, "No fucking way." He comes back, takes pictures, and is just as mind blown as the rest of us. Obviously, we packed up and left immediately. What's even crazier is she probably had been there for a long time. The last time we stayed at this hotel, I would randomly smell cigarette smoke, and I assumed it was just someone smoking in their bathroom, and maybe it was traveling through the vents. But nope, It was just some junkie smoking on just the other side of my mirror. She had access to other rooms too. The holes in the walls were from a renovation, and the hotel hadn't properly patched and just covered it up with the mirror. She could have been hanging out in people's rooms when they were gone. This is all just insane. I'm taking a little time off. Someone suggested that I share this weird encounter in this group. I assure you, this encounter is not fiction. It's completely real. I wish it was, just so it would be easier to accept, but that isn't the case. This encounter happened in February of 2007. I used to work third shift at a paper stock factory warehouse. The main day shift supervisor was on vacation, so our boss on night shift decided she wanted to leave early. So she let us sneak off about 2 hours earlier than normal. So this would have been between 4:30 and 5 a.m. I was following a coworker down this country road, as the warehouse was on the outskirts of my small rural town. I noticed that he hit his brakes, and then proceeded to swerve off the road. I'm probably about 1,000 feet behind him, and I'm thinking to myself, what the heck is this dude doing? And that's when I saw it. There's this tall, dark shape strolling down the middle of the road, in a hunched over and swaying side to side sort of manner. I've likened it to one of those tall windblower figures you see swaying at a car dealership or something, moving like that. Very unnatural movements. I can't do it justice by describing it, as it would only really make sense if someone saw it for themselves like I did. It looked like a tall person wrapped up in a dark blanket or cloak. I had to hit the brakes and swerve too, but I came to a full stop. Whatever it was, I couldn't make out any features or characteristics. I saw a large torso with 2 legs. The upper half was hunched forward, as if it was leaning like an older person, would with a walker. Now at the time, I was driving a 1998 Ford Explorer. I've looked up the height of that vehicle, and it lists around 67 inches. Whatever walked past my driver's window was a good foot or more higher than that, leaning forward. I believe whatever was walking was over 7 foot tall minimum. Again, I could not see a head, any arms. It was just a figure with legs walking. My taillights illuminated it as I started to drive past. I couldn't make out any definite details of the body. I didn't see fur, skin, or anything like clothing. It was just solid. Not like translucent or anything. Just large, thick, and black, or at the very least dark gray in color. My coworker had pulled over into the parking lot a little ways down the road, and I followed him in, and you could tell he was very scared. He was saying something along the lines of, "What was that? It didn't have a head," among a lot of other things most panicked people would say as well. We decided to drive back down and try to see if it's still there, and try to figure out what it actually is. This time I drove in front and he was following behind. We came up to the general area, and I noticed there was a large black animal laying in the middle of the road. It appeared to be some kind of big black dog. Part of me knew this wasn't large enough to be what was walking in the road, but we had to stop because it was directly in the middle of the roadway. I decided to get out and walk up to it, all the while my coworker is yelling at me to get back in my vehicle. As I approach whatever was laying in the road, it brings its head up and looks at me. Its eyes were glowing yellow, which I wrote off as a shine from the headlights, but it growls. I stop dead in my tracks and just watch. This thing stands up on its back legs like a person, but falls back down. It sits back up and hobbles off to the side of the road like a wounded animal that wasn't able to use its front legs. It looked like your typical German Shepherd wolf type face, but its fur was puffy like a chow dog's. It was a lot bigger than most dogs, but still nowhere as tall as whatever that was walking down the road. I saw no blood or wounds, so I can't really say if it was actually hurt or not. My coworker got out of the car at this point, after it had disappeared into the woodline. We discussed what the heck just happened, and while we were talking, I noticed next to our feet was a mouse. It was just standing there with us, but it was cleaning itself. I nudged it with my shoe and it just kept cleaning its face, as if it wasn't afraid of us at all. The mouse was sitting in an upright position, as it was on its hind legs, using its front paws to wipe itself. I never really considered it until recently that all three of these bizarre happenings was on two legs. We got back into our vehicles and drove off. And then the next time at work, I mentioned what had happened to our coworkers, and of course they all laughed at us. So the other guy who saw it told me if I didn't stop talking about it, he's just gonna start denying it, and it's best to just forget about the whole incident. So for essentially 15 years, I've never told anyone up until now. I've tried to rationalize it into something that makes sense, but even then it doesn't completely add up. I've tried to explain it away as just a large dog that must have gotten hit by another vehicle before my coworker and I got there. Maybe it was messing around with the mouse and it got hit, which broke its front legs, and that's why I was trying to use its back legs. The mouse was traumatized from the dog trying to mess with it, so it was just standing there cleaning the dog slobber off itself. I don't know. That's the most plausible thing. The dog was nowhere near as tall as that thing was, though. Even with the dog standing upright, it was close to 6 foot roughly. But whatever was walking had to have easily been over 7 foot tall, as it was so much taller than my Explorer, even with it hunched forward. I can halfway rationally explain away the dog and the mouse, but I can't explain what that was. So I'm back at square one trying to understand what that could possibly be. As someone who's always been very skeptical, it's very hard to accept the unacceptable. I've always been interested in weird creatures and such, but I never really truly believed they existed. I still struggle to believe that all these crazy stories could be true. Yet who am I to say that they aren't? Especially with this weird scenario that my former coworker and I went through that night. All I know is I know what I saw. But whatever I saw is something I don't know and probably never will. I know how crazy it sounds, and I personally would be hesitant to believe it if someone else told me this story. But it happened. When I was about 10 or 11 years old, I shared a room with my brother who was around 15. We both live in the suburb area of New York. Not the greatest area, but not riddled with crime. There are 2 windows in my room, one that overlooks the backyard and one that connects to the front porch. It comes in quite a handy for my brother to sneak out and meet his friends. If you step on the window, you are on the porch, so anyone on the porch can access this window. I was never bothered by that thought because, quite honestly, it's never even crossed my mind. My bed was touching this window, while my brother's bed was perpendicular to mine. It was an odd setup, but that's really beside the point. Now, this was before we had any sort of smartphones or laptops to keep ourselves occupied. So on nights when we weren't sleepy, we would stay up talking to one another, making up dumb games to pass the time. The event I'm about to tell you about took place during the summer. We stayed up into the late hours of the night, perks of having no school. It was probably around 2 a.m., and eventually, we were playing a game where one of us was a goalkeeper and the other was taking a shot. We would both say at the same time, either left, center, or right. If the goalkeeper guessed the same as the one taking the shot, he would get a point. And if the person taking the shot said a position other than what the goalie said, they would get a point. We went for a couple of rounds, and I was beating his ass at this, even though it's irrelevant. I don't remember what round we were on, but we did our 3, 2, 1 countdown. And my brother, the goalkeeper, said left, and I, the shooter, said center. Then a voice from outside the porch window said, left. Me and my brother froze. We had the shade down, but my mom had left the porch light on, so that was the only thing illuminating our room. The dim porch light coming in from the borders of the shade. At the time in my house, my mother was on the opposite side of the house, my sister the room over, and my dad in the basement. So me and my brother were shitting our pants practically. We waited for what seemed to be like an hour, but was probably only 30 to 45 seconds. We hear a giggle, and a playful knock at the window. "Hey, let's go another round. Come on, boys." The voice said in this cheerful, playful tone. Honestly, I want to say it was a scary voice and sounded menacing, but it wasn't. It just sounded like a woman not too old, but young enough. Just normal. Like a normal sounding voice, nothing off about it besides where it was coming from and the time it came. Me and my brother were seriously freaked out. Was about to break down because of how close this woman was actually to us. The thought that all I had to do was lift the shade, and I'd be face to face with this person scared the shit out of me, and made me go as still and stiff as if I just looked into Medusa's eyes. After a while of me and my brother not responding, my brother slowly moving from his bed to the door as if to not make any noise. As my brother was tiptoeing to the door, the sound of nails being ran down a window started. It's very slow, from top to bottom. At that point, my brother made it to the door. He looked back at me and brought his fingers to his lip, gesturing for me to keep quiet. Once the nails stopped running down my window, I heard her light footsteps make their way off my porch and disappear into the night. I laid there for what felt like an eternity, not moving until my brother returned with my mother, and I saw her move hastily by my door, making her way to the front door. The porch light flipped off, and I was left in darkness with my brother waiting in the doorway for my mother's return. I heard my mom call my dad up the stairs, and his groggy, annoyed footsteps coming up. They talked and then came into me and my brother's room, and we relayed what had just happened. Apparently, my mom caught sight of the lady turning out of our driveway, behind some tall bushes. Thank God we had a long driveway, otherwise my mom probably would have thought we were just crazy. Considering no harm was done besides leaving me terrified of my window, my parents didn't call the police. They just thought it was really weird and stayed up the rest of the night to make sure that she didn't return. I'm 17 years old now. My brother is in college, so I have this room all to myself. My bed still touches the window because I'm too lazy to move the rest of the furniture in my room so I can move my bed. The shade to that window has not been opened since that incident. Probably never will. We've all had bad dates, right? This is the only one I've had to date that rang every alarm bell and waved every single red flag. I'll preface this by saying I don't go on many dates as it is, but when I do, I make sure I follow safety protocols only by meeting my date in public places. I also let either family or friends know where I'm going to be and park in a populated place close to wherever we're supposed to meet. So this date initially suggested that we meet at his house to watch a movie and have a few drinks. I told him no, I don't feel comfortable with that, and I only want to meet in public. At first he seemed okay with this, but then he brought it up a few more times. I asked if money was an issue, or if that was the case we could meet up another time or just forget about it altogether. On my date backtracked and went with my idea of meeting at a cafe that I chose. He turns up in a two-door car. This detail is relevant. Then goes into the cafe and I follow behind and introduce myself. After a very quick, polite introduction, things get weird. After I order a Coke, he says, "Don't you want a drink?" I was gonna pop into the bar and get one. I say, "No, I'm not drinking." And he just looks at me like WTF, as if I'm being unreasonable. I already explained in messages that I don't drink as I'm on medication, so having to re-explain it again kind of pisses me off. He seems disappointed and goes to order a cider from the bar while I get a table. We sit down with our drinks and immediately goes on about going back to his place again, even though the original plan was to stay here and order food. And I'd already stated previously it was not going to happen. He says something along the lines of having a few drinks and then just eating at his place. I said, "No, we don't even have to eat. We can just have our drinks and then leave." He gets defensive and says he has money but prefers it if we go back to his. I make an awkward joke and say, "You're not a killer or something, are you?" Instead of laughing it off, he just stares at me and then says, "You don't think I would hurt you, do you? I laugh uncomfortably and say, of course not, but really? I'm relieved this date won't be going any further. He suddenly says, are you gonna follow me in your car? Because that would make sense. How about we go in my car? I've got packages in the front, so you have to squeeze in the back. And I'll drop you back off to your car after. In reality, that made less sense than me following him in my own car and then driving home from his house after. The fact that it was completely illogical made it even more creepy in my mind. Every alarm bell was going off at this point, and I said, look, I don't want to go to your house, and your insistence is giving me the creeps. He looked shocked, mumbled about something about the toilet, and excused himself from the table. A few moments later, I see him through the cafe window, getting into his car and just driving off. Massive bullet dodged, in my opinion. The fact that his car didn't have back doors made it even more sinister, because imagine if something happened in the car. I wouldn't be able to escape. This story is from a childhood friend who told me this, and it still unnerves me to this day. She was genuinely freaked out, and her family even backed up this claim, so here you go. So basically, my friend and her family moved into this rental property, which my friend said was haunted. It gave everyone this awe feeling. Those who visited and stayed over would mention it themselves. I myself experienced this odd feeling of foreboding whenever I went over there and believed in the consensus that the house was indeed haunted. It honestly felt oppressed, and you would just feel this pitiful dread. It's hard to put into words. It was just extremely uncomfortable, to say the least. Anyway, now on to the event that is the basis of this post. It was enough for my friend's family to pack up and stay with relatives until they moved out permanently. On that fateful afternoon, my friend had arrived back home from a park and heard an argument taking place in the kitchen between her mom and dad. My friend thought this was odd, as both of her parents should be at work, so she called out to her mother, "Mom?" before unlocking the front door and going inside. My friend said the house felt instantly silent, an uncanny silence, like the air had been sucked out of the place. It felt stifling and just wrong. Then her mom said, "Hey, we're just in here." My friend was just outside the closed kitchen door at this point and froze before opening. This was indeed her mother's voice, but something was off. Like the cadence was missing that actually made it her mother. It sounded flat and unnatural. My friend decided to bolt back out the front door and just wait outside until her brother came home. She said as soon as she turned her back to the house, she saw her mother peering at her from the lounge room window, but it wasn't her mother. The face was the same. Everything was the same, but her face was devoid of anything that made it her mother. There was no recognition on her mother's face. There was no indication that she was even looking directly at her daughter. There was no emotion in the expression. Nothing. The eyes looked back unstaring and utterly blank. My friend screamed and ran down the street to her mother's work and confirmed that she was there this whole time and had never been home. Initially, my friend's mother reasoned that someone must have broke in, but a later investigation proved that nothing had been stolen and the back door was locked, as was the front door when my friend came home. No one could rationalize who my friend saw in that window and why it looked so much like her mother. So that was the deciding factor to nope the hell out of there and find somewhere else to live. The landlord of the house denied anything like this happening when they lived there, but did admit that tenants didn't stay long, saying there was something wrong inside that house. My friend also told me that she was the only one who actually saw anything definitively sinister while living in the house. But her family all said they definitely agreed that they felt an evil presence there, which ultimately manifested into the doppelganger experience that my friend had. Utterly terrifying.